45-year-old bus driver and father of two, Regulus Regis Teotico, was found with fatal gunshot wounds at his workplace headquarters in San Jose, California, on September 20, 2024. Investigators traced the crime to Teotico's co-worker, 33-year-old Duc Minh Bui, who reportedly owed the victim money over gambling debts. In the days leading up to his murder, Teotico called another co-worker twice and asked him to be present when he met with Bui to collect the money. Bui agreed to repay Teotico after they finished their work shift on the night of the deadly confrontation, and the witness was just arriving at the scene when gunfire broke out. The witness followed Bui's car for a brief distance before turning around and going back to the crime scene to check on Teotico, who was unresponsive and slumped over in the driver's seat of his car. Upon realizing that there was nothing he could do to help his friend, the witness dialed 911. The shooting was captured on surveillance footage, making it easy for police to identify Bui as the prime suspect in the case. In the video, Bui could be seen reaching into his bag for a gun and firing multiple bullets at Teotico. Police arrested the accused perpetrator 2 days after the killing as he left his house, and he remains held without bail amid the ongoing case. Number 21. Yang Qingpei. In September 2016, the remote high-altitude Chinese village of Yema was terrorized by one of his own residents who murdered his parents and 17 other people in an effort to cover up his crime. 27-year-old Yang Qingpei's killing spree began after his mother and father refused to pay his gambling debts. His victims ranged in age from 3 to 72 years old, indicating that he spared no one whom he thought might put him at risk of getting caught. The Chinese media was criticized by Western news outlets for its cryptic coverage of the case in the days following the media. It didn't even make front-page news, yet the killings were reportedly the main talk of the region. A hotel owner told reporters that locals initially thought the killings were a terrorist attack, but their opinion changed after learning that most of the victims were related to Yang, a socially awkward loner with a gambling habit. Yang was arrested roughly 130 miles outside Yema in the provincial capital of Kunming. He confessed to the murders following his capture and was ultimately sentenced to death. Number 20. Rakesh Bhayani. When career conman and compulsive gambler Rakesh Bhayani found himself unable to keep up with his mounting debts and failed scams in April 2012, he murdered his ex-girlfriend in an attempt to acquire her $750,000 flat in London. Also desperate to save his crumbling marriage, the 41-year-old contacted 49-year-old Carol Waugh, a lonely escort, and stabbed her in the neck with a knife. After meeting online, Bhayani charmed Waugh into believing he was trustworthy. He convinced her to loan him large amounts of money, but when he failed to pay it back, Waugh threatened to expose his double life to his wife and family. Bhayani disposed of Waugh's body with help from a fellow career criminal, 48-year-old Nicholas Kuttner. In the meantime, Waugh's family became worried about her well-being and undertook efforts to locate her. During the investigation, detectives discovered that the suspects had hired women to pose as Waugh in order to withdraw money from her credit and bank accounts. By the time Waugh's body was discovered 3.5 months after her murder, Bhayani and Kuttner had both been arrested for fraud. Faced with the prospect of a lifetime behind bars, the men blamed each other for Waugh's murder while being questioned by law enforcement. They continued pointing the finger at each other during their trials, and the jury acquitted Kuttner of murder but found him guilty of perverting the course of justice for assisting in the disposal of her remains. Bhayani was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 27 years. Number 19. Sarah Jacqueline King. While working as an attorney in Newport Beach, California, 39-year-old Sarah Jacqueline King boasted about how she provided loans to wealthy and famous clients. But she ruined her own credibility and reputation in 2022 by going on a 6-month, $10 million gambling spree that she financed with money from 5 investors. In fact, according to federal prosecutors, King never funded a legitimate loan, instead using her clients' money entirely on her addiction and luxurious lifestyle, including the purchase of a $132,000 Porsche. According to a lawsuit, she spent the entirety of her gambling spree living at the Wynn Las Vegas Resort and Hotel, where she gambled 24/7. Meanwhile, she falsely listed non-existent collateral for 97 phony loans, including designer handbags, antique coins, collectible comic books, and guaranteed income from professional sports contracts. By the time the lawsuit was filed, King reportedly had just $12 to her name. In June of 2023, she pleaded guilty to federal counts of wire fraud and money laundering. According to the most recent available updates on the case, she appeared to still be awaiting sentencing and was facing potential legal consequences for failing to appear in civil court regarding the lawsuit. Records show that King's law license was suspended in 2022 and she remains ineligible to practice law but has not been officially disbarred. Number 18. Corinna Walker. During the summer of 2024, sheriff's deputies in Ozark County, Missouri, received a call about a little girl being left unattended in a hot car with the windows rolled up. They arrived to find the child secured to her booster seat inside the locked car where she had been left alone for nearly a half hour. Police found the girl's mother, 39-year-old Corinna Walker, playing a slot machine inside a nearby convenience store. Walker reportedly admitted that she had withdrawn cash from an ATM to play the machine while picking up a pizza, insisting that she kept an eye on her daughter the entire time to make sure that she wasn't in distress. During that time, the temperature inside the car reached 110 degrees Fahrenheit. She was charged with 1 felony count of endangering the welfare of a minor and released on her own recognizance with instructions to return to court at a later time. Number 17. Vasile Culea. In January of 2022, 34-year-old Vasile Culea followed 88-year-old Kenneth Walker home from a betting shop in Derbyshire, England. He then broke into the residence and attacked Kenneth and his wife, 86-year-old Frida, who were rumored to keep a large amount of money inside the residence. Culea bound and hogtied the Walkers, then searched their home for the $37,000 he believed it contained. Kenneth couldn't remember where he had hidden the cash and Culea was unable to find it. The intruder left empty-handed, but not until after he viciously killed Frida and assaulted Kenneth, who died several months later from unrelated causes. Both victims suffered lacerations and severe brain injuries, and Frida's airway was obstructed. Culea fled the scene with a few $100s that he found in Frida's purse after hearing what he thought was a car outside. Police identified him as the suspect using surveillance footage which showed him walking in the neighborhood just moments after leaving the Walker's house, and he was charged with Frida's murder. While searching the crime scene, officers found the money that Culea had tried so desperately to get his hands on. A jury found Culea guilty later that year after deliberating for just over 2 hours, and in October 2022 he was sentenced to life with a minimum of 34 years before becoming eligible for parole. Number 16. Lachlan Morganti. 23-year-old Hannah Maguire's family reported her missing in Victoria, Australia, in April 2024. Later that day, her slain body was found in a burned-out vehicle in Scarsdale. Her boyfriend, 22-year-old Lachlan Young, was charged with her murder and has since pleaded not guilty to the crime. Almost immediately following the discovery of Maguire's remains, a 22-year-old man named Lachlan Morganti started a crowdfunding campaign to help her family cover expenses while they grieve and pursue justice. The fundraiser garnered more than $64,000 in donations, but Morganti failed to turn over a single cent of the proceeds to the Maguire family as promised. Instead, he used the money to fund his gambling addiction, which he had been struggling with for 4 years. In September 2024, Morganti pleaded guilty to theft. He was sentenced to 400 hours of community service, and the case against Young is ongoing. Number 15. Phillip McCorkle. Acting on a set of tips from a child welfare network in July of 2024, sheriff's deputies in Indian River County, Florida, discovered evidence that a local resident was using AI to create explicit imagery of minors. Armed with a search warrant, members of law enforcement paid a visit to the mobile home of 38-year-old Phillip McCorkle, where he lived with his unsuspecting parents. McCorkle's mother and father seemed genuinely unaware of any nefarious activity that might have been going on in their home, while McCorkle initially denied having any questionable content on his devices. Once he realized there was no avoiding getting caught, he claimed that he may have traded images with another internet user, but that he didn't specifically seek out the type of material that the person sent to him. And he acted like he had no interest in that type of content, but the videos on his hard drive told a different story. Deputies seized Phillip's electronics and proceeded to find at least 20 AI-generated files featuring inappropriately young-looking subjects. Authorities arrested McCorkle at his movie theater job in Vero Beach on 20 counts of obscenity and was released after posting 10% of bonds totaling $33,000. Records show that he tried getting his case transferred to a mental health diversion program, claiming that he suffers from depression, but the judge denied the request and the case is ongoing. Number 14. The murder of David Haiman. 20-year-old David Alexander Haiman was reported missing in Grand Rapids, Minnesota in June of 2016 after he failed to show up at work for his scheduled shift. No one had seen or heard from him in 5 days, prompting a search which led to the discovery of his dismembered head and torso in 2 separate locations in the ball club area of Itasca County. During the search, deputies got into a chase with 35-year-old Joseph Kristen Torreson, who soon became the prime suspect in the case. Detectives also narrowed their focus on Torreson's girlfriend, 22-year-old Kayleen Danielle Greniger, who admitted that she got upset when she learned that Haiman was coming to the couple's apartment on the day of his death because he had supposedly assaulted her on a previous occasion. When Haiman arrived, the couple tied him up and beat him, breaking his nose in the process. The 3 then left the apartment to smoke methamphetamine and go on a drive through the woods, during which Torreson stopped the car while pretending to have engine trouble. Haiman got out of the car and was looking under the hood when Torreson struck him in the head with a baseball bat, stabbed him repeatedly with the victim's own knife, and then beheaded him. In early 2017, Greniger took a plea deal and admitted to a reduced second-degree murder charge. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Torreson received a life sentence without parole later that year after being found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Number 13. Adam Matos. 27-year-old Megan Brown and her family were massacred in August of 2014, just a month after moving into their Hudson, Florida home. After discovering the bodies of Megan, her father, 52-year-old Gregory Brown, her mother, 52-year-old Margaret Brown, and her new boyfriend, 37-year-old Nicholas Leonard, police quickly narrowed in on the father of Megan's child as the prime suspect in the case. 28-year-old Adam Matos had shot Megan and Gregory at point-blank range, while Margaret and Nick were bludgeoned to death. He kept the remains in the house for another 5 days before dumping them on top of a hill in Pasco County, about a mile from the home. To make matters even more disturbing, Matos left he and Megan's son alone inside the residence for hours at a time before moving the bodies to the site where they were eventually found. He left several times, including to go drink beer and to run errands. Authorities investigated the situation after a concerned relative requested a welfare check. Officers discovered an obvious crime scene at the house and in one of the family's vehicles, where investigators found blood and evidence of human decomposition. By then, Matos had fled to a hotel with his son in tow. Investigators soon learned that just hours before she was last heard from, Megan had frantically sent her boss text messages about Matos had threatened to kill her with a knife and that she fully believed he planned to follow through. Additionally, phone records showed that Matos had called Megan and her family more than 200 times over an 8-hour span on August 28th. The following day, he sold several of the family's belongings, including their 2 dogs. Police tracked Matos down and arrested him the same day the bodies were found, by which point Megan, Gregory, Margaret, and Nick had been dead for over 2 weeks. Matos initially maintained his innocence in a jailhouse interview, claiming that he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. He also denied threatening Megan prior to the murders, but eventually changed his story, claiming that he had killed the victims in self-defense. More than 3 years after the killings, in November 2017, a jury found Matos guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors pursued the death penalty, but he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Number 12. Hanny Papanicolaou. An Australian housekeeper's gambling addiction drove her to unthinkable extremes on January 2nd, 2019, when she broke into the suburban Sydney home of her 92-year-old client and murdered the senior citizen out of a desperation for money. According to prosecutors, 35-year-old Hanny Papanicolaou was gambling at 9:30 in the morning when she decided to act on her sinister plan. Before entering the Ashbury residence, 38-year-old Hanny Papanicolaou texted her husband saying that 92-year-old Marjorie Walsh was going to die. She parked away from the house since it wasn't her scheduled day to work and entered the home through the back door. Once inside, she attacked Walsh with a walking stick, a knife, and cookware, then left the elderly woman to die on the floor. Walsh was found clinging to life at the crime scene but later succumbed to her injuries. Meanwhile, Papanicolaou was charged with attempted murder, which was upgraded to a murder charge following the victim's death. She denied murdering Walsh and admitted to manslaughter, but a jury found her guilty of the more severe charge of murder, resulting in a 15-year prison sentence. Number 11. The Bottoms Twins. In April of 2019, a heavily tattooed 29-year-old convicted felon named Lawrence Dragon Bottoms was killed during a confrontation with law enforcement in Hancock County, Mississippi. Sheriff's deputies paid a visit to Bottoms in an attempt to serve an arrest warrant out of East Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where he was wanted on a gun charge. Due to Bottoms' extensive criminal history, which included stabbing a teenager in the face with a screwdriver, the police were prepared for a complicated and dangerous arrest. After spending between 15 and 20 minutes calling his name from outside his front door, deputies deployed tear gas in an effort to force Bottoms out of the residence. A woman soon emerged, but Bottoms remained stubbornly inside the home. He eventually leapt from a second-story window and fled on foot into the forest, but was shot dead shortly thereafter when he pulled a gun on a pursuing deputy. As it turned out, Lawrence had a twin brother, William, who sported similar face tattoos. At the time of Lawrence's death, William was in custody as the prime suspect in a double murder that had taken place in Grangeville, Louisiana. 2 years earlier, the victims, 23-year-old Dedrick Dwayne Williams and 29-year-old Mohammed Siad Hussein, had been found in a car with gunshot wounds to the head and a sheet covering their bodies. Williams' girlfriend, Megan Gaylord, told investigators that William became paranoid and shot the two victims while the four of them were riding around in a car together after buying heroin. She cooperated in exchange for leniency, and an accessory charge was dropped. In 2019, Williams was found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder, resulting in 2 mandatory life terms without parole. He appealed his case, but his convictions and sentences were upheld. Number 10. Michael Jayne. The decision to use methamphetamine ended regrettably for a Utah couple in early May of 2024 when 42-year-old Michael Jayne was accused of hitting and killing a Santa Quinn police officer with his semi-truck. Prior to the deadly collision, Jayne's terrified girlfriend managed to escape during a traffic stop, while a police officer spoke with Jayne by jumping out of his truck and screaming for help. Jayne's girlfriend later told police that she was accompanying Jayne on a multi-state truck route that he was driving for his job. The pair had used methamphetamine together the night before, causing Jayne to become paranoid and violent. This much became evident in his 911 call to police during the morning hours, when he claimed that the Hells Angels were following him and that someone was riding on the back of his truck. During the traffic stop, Jayne pulled away, made a U-turn, then fatally rammed his truck into Santa Quinn Police Sergeant Bill Hooser. He then fled the scene and stole several vehicles before being apprehended roughly 150 miles from the crime scene. According to news reports, Jayne has a history of similar violence toward police officers. More than 10 years earlier, he had been convicted of assaulting and threatening members of law enforcement in Oregon and California. In 2009, he was convicted of assault for trying to run over a cop with his vehicle in Klamath County, Oregon. There have been other incidents involving volatile behavior toward police, and Jayne was reportedly on federal parole at the time of Hooser's death. Following his capture, Jayne was charged with capital murder. Prosecutors are pursuing the death penalty, and the accused killer remains held without bail amid the ongoing case. Number 9. The murder of Donovan Barfield. 28-year-old Donovan Barfield enjoyed playing dice, but the game sometimes attracts ill-intending individuals who are looking to gain some quick cash. Such was the case in December of 2018 when Barfield was shot dead inside an apartment in Lansing, Michigan during an early morning dice game. 23-year-old Anthony Brown, 19-year-old Neil Prince, and another teenager named Willie Fletcher had arranged to meet with Barfield for the specific purpose of robbing him. After pumping 6 bullets into Barfield, the suspects fled the scene with money, shoes, a backpack, and jewelry. Police found the victim's body later that day after being called to perform a welfare check at the residence. They were shocked to learn from Barfield's friend Joe Woods that the murder had been inadvertently captured on video by a nearby laptop camera. Woods was initially hesitant to share what he knew and appeared visibly frightened during his conversation with the police, but he eventually opened up, giving law enforcement a crucial piece of evidence which helped solve the case. In December 2019, Neil Prince was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole, while Fletcher took a plea deal and admitted to murder in exchange for a sentence of 28 to 60 years. Anthony Brown was found guilty following a 7-day trial in 2021 and is serving life without parole. Number 8. David Joey Pedersen. Over a 10-day period during the fall of 2011, 31-year-old self-admitted white supremacist David Joey Pedersen and his girlfriend, 24-year-old Holly Grigsby, went on an interstate killing spree, leaving at least 4 people dead across 3 states. Included among the victims were Pedersen's father, 56-year-old David Red Pedersen, and his stepmother, 69-year-old Leslie Pedersen, inside the couple's Everett, Washington home. From there, Pedersen and Grigsby fled to neighboring Oregon, where they abducted and killed 19-year-old Cody Faye Myers, whom they had mistaken for being Jewish. Hoping to kill more Jews, the couple then drove to Eureka, California, and fatally shot a 53-year-old disabled black man named Reginald Allen Clark. Police managed to catch up with the murderous couple before they could claim any more lives by tracking their use of stolen credit cards. Pedersen ultimately admitted to the murders, claiming that he believed his father had committed crimes against children and that his stepmother knew about it and tolerated it. Grigsby also confessed, and the pair were each charged with multiple counts of murder and other crimes. In 2012, Pedersen pleaded guilty to killing his parents and was sentenced to 2 life terms without parole. In 2014, he was sentenced to 2 additional life terms in federal court in the state of Oregon. During his sentencing hearing, he launched into a diatribe about how his only regret was his failure to start a race revolution, and that he was motivated to commit his crimes by the supposed decay of society's traditional Western values. Grigsby, who had originally taken credit for killing Pedersen's mother, backpedaled on her story and denied committing any of the murders. She was nevertheless found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison, and much like Pedersen, she expressed a continued commitment to white supremacy during her sentencing hearing. Number 7. Bailey Sharp. 25-year-old Justin Hilbert was found murdered along a roadside in Riverside County, California, in June of 2016. He had been beaten, stabbed, and shot in the face multiple times at another location before being dumped where his body was found. 3 weeks later, 23-year-old Bailey Sharp was found bleeding out from multiple stab wounds on a street in Riverside in broad daylight. She died from her injuries at a nearby hospital. While investigating the case, detectives realized that Hilbert and Sharp both knew U.S. Navy sailor Jared Bischoff, who was Sharp's boyfriend and the ex-husband of Hilbert's fiancée, Tonya Rep. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, it became evident that Sharp had gotten caught in the throes of addiction and had been selling drugs for Bischoff prior to her murder. Investigators also learned that Bischoff was furious with Tonya for leaving him, and he had recruited Sharp to help him kill Hilbert. The couple also planned to kill Tonya and split her $100,000 life insurance policy 3 ways between themselves and an accomplice, Danny Serrano. While the trio succeeded in killing Hilbert, their plan to murder Tonya failed when she refused to meet Sharp outside. Seemingly fearful about Bischoff's reaction to the botched plot, Sharp began avoiding him after Hilbert's murder. Witnesses would later report seeing Bischoff brutally abusing Sharp in the days leading up to her death. Learning that Sharp was involved in a murder before she herself was killed was a hard pill for her family to swallow, but they now say they understand how gripping addiction can be and are vocal advocates for the availability of help and resources. In April 2024, Bischoff was found guilty of both Hilbert and Sharp's murders and was sentenced to life in prison, while Serrano also received a life sentence for his role in Hilbert's death. Number 6. Greg Irvin. 74-year-old Ann James was unpacking her groceries and making soup at her home in the English town of Walsall when someone viciously knifed her to death in February of 2018. A neighbor found her body and police traced the crime to the victim's grandson, 26-year-old Greg Irvin, a cocaine and gambling addict with mounting debts totaling more than $43,000. Irvin initially claimed that he had only spoken to his grandmother on the phone that day, but the surveillance video showed him pulling up to the victim's house in his car and going inside. It also showed him calmly leaving with a white bag that police believe contained the murder weapon, which was never found. When confronted with the evidence, Irvin denied having any memory of the gruesome slaying. In November of 2018, he was found guilty and sentenced to at least 24 years in prison. His motive remains a mystery to this day. Number 5. Stephen Hagin. During the summer of 2014, the skeletal remains of missing 38-year-old father of 3, Brian Batchel, were found in Pass Christian, Mississippi. When he was last seen by his family about a month earlier, his sister noticed that he wasn't acting like himself. She tried convincing Bachtel to stay at her house, knowing he would be safe there, but he insisted on leaving. By the time Bachtel's body was found, 26-year-old Stephen Hagin had already been identified as a suspect in the case. Following the discovery of the remains, Hagin was charged with capital murder, and his girlfriend, 23-year-old Amma Slocum, was charged with being an accessory after the fact. Hagin confessed to shooting Bachtel because he couldn't afford the drugs that he had asked Bachtel to bring to him. In June of 2018, he pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the requirement to serve every single day due to his status as a habitual offender. Number 4. Cameron Scott Halliburton. Early one morning in November of 2017, 27-year-old Jared Klein lost control of his pickup truck while driving in Texarkana, Texas, and crashed. The vehicle struck a tree and Klein's body was found in the driver's seat with multiple stab wounds. Investigators quickly learned that Klein had been with his best friend, 29-year-old Cameron Scott Halliburton, prior to his death. Surveillance footage from a Family Dollar store near the crash scene showed Halliburton stumbling into the store just a few minutes after Klein's truck was seen veering past the building. Police found Halliburton sleeping next to a dumpster and took him down the station for questioning. While they were talking to him, they noticed blood on his clothing. His knife sheath was empty, further pointing toward his involvement in Klein's death. But he adamantly denied killing his friend. He eventually admitted to smoking a synthetic drug that night, but remained insistent that he wasn't the killer. Authorities nevertheless charged Halliburton with first-degree murder, and in late 2018, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. Number 3. Ben Jones. 29-year-old Becky Jones of Nottingham, England, was 4 months pregnant in July of 2018 when she found out that her husband, Ben, confessed to stealing $25,000 from his local rugby club in order to fund his gambling addiction. This was bad enough news, but the situation became infinitely worse 4 months later when Becky learned that Ben had stolen around $469,000 from his employer. He had taken an estimated $37,000 per month over a 3.5-year period, driving the cake decorating company that he worked for into bankruptcy. In November of 2019, Ben was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the theft, leaving Becky on her own to support their family. She later told BBC News that she was totally unaware of Ben's gambling problem before his first theft confession. Ben had made efforts to quit gambling, but he relapsed due to constant temptation, and his addiction ultimately got the best of him. As he serves his time and Becky works to repair their lives on the outside, she's calling for better gambling regulations to prevent these types of situations from spiraling out of control. Number 2. Joy Delaney. 32-year-old fraudster Joy Delaney stole nearly $500,000 from 38 friends and colleagues, many of whom forked over their life savings into what they thought was a lucrative investment scheme. In reality, it was a scam, and Delaney gambled her investors' money away online. She managed to pull the ruse off for 5 years, started in 2015, and she continued to scam people even after she got caught and confessed to her crimes in 2020. Delaney was out on bail when she continued to steal, telling people that she could nearly double their $6,800 investment within a few years, ignoring the age-old rule about how if something seems too good to be true, then it probably is. People scrambled not to pass up on the fraudster's offer, but it was only a matter of time before Delaney got caught again, and in April 2022 she admitted to 38 counts of fraud, resulting in a 5-year prison sentence. The judge admonished her for taking advantage of innocent people, including an elderly woman who had just lost her husband and a man who ended up declaring bankruptcy. Right after the last listing, we will line up our release from a while back about when text messaging goes wrong. It's a good one and falls right in line with today's topic, so stick around if you haven't seen it yet. Number 1. Rubi Verduzco. On Christmas Eve in 2024, a police officer in Seminole, Florida, was called to the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino where a young child was seen wandering alone in a soiled diaper. According to an employee, 3 men had left the baby at the bell desk and walked away more than 30 minutes prior to the officer's arrival. Roughly 15 minutes after the officer arrived on scene, the child's mother, 29-year-old Rubi Verduzco, showed up in a seemingly intoxicated state. She reportedly smelled like alcohol and was unable to tell the police the baby's date of birth. An officer spoke on the phone with a man purporting to be the child's father, but he gave conflicting stories, leaving law enforcement unsure of what to believe. First, he claimed that he was in Oklahoma and that the state should take custody of the child. Then he admitted to being in Orlando, but said he wasn't sure if he could come pick the child up. Unsure if the man was really the baby's father, police arrested Verduzco on 2 counts of felony child neglect, and the child was taken into the custody of Florida's Department of Children and Families. Number 9. Chance Botha. In 2012, seconds after telling a friend that he needed to stop texting and driving because he could die, 21-year-old Houston student Chance Botha lost control of his car. He flew off a 35-foot-tall bridge. The engine of his truck broke through the dashboard, crushing his head and body. Botha's friends removed him from the wreck moments before it caught fire. Botha was on the verge of death and in the hospital. He flatlined 3 times. He had traumatic brain injuries, facial and skull fractures, broken ribs, shattered legs, a broken neck, and a punctured lung, among others. In what his doctors had deemed a miracle, Botha recovered 80% within several months. Number 8. Helicopter crash. According to the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, a 2011 medical helicopter crash is believed to be the first commercial accident to have occurred as the result of texting and flying. The incident took place in Missouri as 58-year-old patient Terry Tacaront was being transferred between hospitals. Pilot James Freudenbert, age 34, had received and sent several texts before takeoff and during the flight, which had allegedly caused him to become distracted. Some of the exchanged messages had reportedly been regarding dinner plans with a colleague. Air Methods Corp, the company operating the Eurocopter AS-350 aircraft, strictly banned pilots using electronic devices during flight. As he left from St. Joseph, Freudenberg believed he had enough fuel to last him 2 hours. After landing at a hospital in Bethany, from where the medical helicopter picked up Tacaront, the pilot realized he had less fuel than previously thought. He told company communication it was enough to last him for 45 minutes until he reached a refueling point. Half an hour later, the helicopter was running on empty and went down in a field near Mosby. Aside from Freudenberg and Tacaront, a nurse and a flight paramedic were also killed in the crash. Number 7. John Dalglish. In 2008, John Dalglish was crossing Ponteland Road in Newcastle, England, when he became distracted by a text message he received on his phone. It was an unsolicited ad from a debt management company. Seconds after checking his phone, 22-year-old Dalglish stepped into the path of an oncoming car, driven by student Patrick Hamilton. Dalglish sustained devastating injuries after he was struck by the vehicle. Aside from a severe leg fracture, he also suffered major head trauma that caused a buildup of pressure in his brain. Doctors worked to bring down the swelling, but their efforts proved fruitless. A few weeks went by in which the young man showed no signs of improvement. He ultimately passed away at the hospital. Number 6. Reggie Shaw. On September the 22nd of 2006, Utah teenager Reggie Shaw was driving while sending and receiving text messages. Behind him was a pickup truck pulling a trailer. Distracted, 19-year-old Shaw drifted over the center line. He clipped an oncoming Saturn, in which 38-year-old James Fufaro and Keith Odell, aged 50, were commuting to work. The Saturn was sent spinning into the path of the pickup truck, which plowed into it, killing Fufaro and Odell. According to a responding state trooper, the impact had been so violent that the victim's eyes had popped out. Shaw, who admitted his wrongdoing, spent several weeks in prison for negligent homicide. In the aftermath, he was forgiven by the victims' families and became a prominent advocate against distracted driving. The incident inspired the book A Deadly Wandering by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Matt Rechtel. In it, the narrative of Shaw's story is interspersed with scientific studies on human attention. Rechtel cited a study which maintained that for 15 seconds after reading a text, the driver suffers from impaired focus. He also mentioned that no state banned texting and driving following Shaw's accident, as well as the fact that, at first, cell phone companies denied the dangers of this practice. Number 5. Chad Olson. In January of 2014, a retired Florida police captain fatally shot a man following an argument over texting in the movie theater. 71-year-old Curtis Reeves and Chad Olson, aged 43, were at Wesley Chapel Complex for a matinee showing of Lone Survivor. Both were joined by their wives. According to Reeves' version of events, Olson became furious after he told him to stop texting during the previews. Reeves maintained that he drew his gun after the younger man had thrown his cell phone at him, striking him in the face. Vivian Reeves later claimed that she hadn't seen the incident. Reeves told the authorities that he feared for his life after Olson stood up and tried to climb over his chair whilst making threats and yelling obscenities. A surveillance video captured what seemed to be Olson grabbing Reeves' popcorn and throwing it at him. The former police captain responded by instantaneously shooting Olson, with the bullet fatally piercing his chest. Olson's wife, Nicole, sustained a severe injury to her hand while trying to deflect the bullet meant for him. The shooter was arrested at the scene, and a photo would subsequently emerge of him in a movie theater seat while handcuffed. Reeves was charged with second-degree murder and aggravated battery. It's believed that he'll try to cite Florida's Stand Your Ground law during his trial, which is set for April of 2021. Number 4. Shannon Gittins. On October the 3rd of 2018, only a few days after passing her driving exam, 17-year-old Shannon Gittins was involved in a fatal crash. The teenager was reportedly texting her boyfriend when she lost control of her Fiat 500. Gittins, from the town of Diss in England, swerved into oncoming traffic on the busy A140 highway before colliding with a tree on the other side of the road. Gittins was cut free from the wreck by first responders and pronounced dead at the scene. Her boyfriend provided law enforcement with screenshots of their conversation, and the authorities were able to determine the most likely scenario that had led to the accident. The time that she received the last text coincided, according to dashcam footage captured by the car behind her, with the moment her Fiat had veered out of its lane. Number 3. Marcellus Anderson. In 2016, Marcellus Anderson was walking to work in Memphis, Tennessee, when he was hit by a car and left in critical condition. According to the police, the driver, Carlos Westbrook, was texting while he was behind the wheel. Westbrook didn't have insurance and was also driving with a suspended license. 22-year-old Anderson was on the sidewalk when he was struck by the out-of-control vehicle. He was taken to a hospital where he died roughly a month later. His friends and family, who'd watched the young man wither away, subsequently held a vigil for him at the site of the accident. Anderson was survived by 2 young daughters. Number 2. Joseph Witkowski. In 2011, a man killed his neighbor over a text that had been modified by the phone's autocorrect feature. 27-year-old Joseph Witkowski had been arguing with his friend and neighbor, 33-year-old Neil Brook. At one point, Brook had sent him a text containing the word mutter, which was accidentally modified to nutter. This enraged Witkowski, and according to Brook, he showed up at his home in Walkden, England, with a large kitchen knife. Brook had also taped knives to the walls of his apartment in advance of Witkowski's threatening arrival. When he came to his home, Brook chased him down the hall and into the bathroom. Witkowski barricaded himself inside, but Brook broke through the door and unleashed a savage attack. He stabbed Witkowski repeatedly, then stomped on him. The police arrested Brook and found his victim dead in a pool of blood. He'd sustained roughly 104 injuries, including cracked ribs, bruises, cuts, and other lacerations. The fatal stab had pierced his heart. A jury accepted Brook's version of events and deemed that the brutal attack had indeed been provoked. He was instead found guilty of manslaughter and jailed for a minimum of 6 years. Number 1. Danielle Delgado Garcia. While on her way to work on May the 26th of 2018, Kansas woman Danielle Delgado Garcia rear-ended a semi-truck while texting and driving. The woman's mother arrived at the hospital roughly at the same time as the ambulance. She spoke to Delgado Garcia for a brief moment before she was airlifted to a hospital in Wichita. A few hours later, the woman was given the heartbreaking news that her daughter had passed away. In a blog post for the Kansas Department of Transportation, she would talk about her daughter's final words to her, which were, "It hurts so bad, Mom. My stomach hurts so bad." The woman would go on to launch a campaign called #DoItForDanielle to raise awareness about texting and driving. Thanks for watching. If you could bet all your earthly possessions on either red or black, with the added perk that if you win, you'd receive 4 times the amount you bet, would you do it? And why or why not? Let us know in the comment section below.